Resident Evil has had a pretty rough go branching out into traditional media, huh? When you say Resident Evil movie, the first thing that comes to mind is probably the Paul W.S. Anderson stint. I know most people despise these with a passion, but I would be lying if I said I didn't enjoy them. They're so genuinely stupid, it's impossible for me to not get a kick out of most of them. Simultaneously, I don't mind their lack of accuracy to the source material, because let's be real, they're hardly Resident Evil movies. In fact, most of these have so little to do with the games that it will catch you off guard when they finally decide to throw in something from Resident Evil. One minute you're watching a guy slam dunk an airplane, and the next they're introducing Chris Redfield, and you go, oh yeah, this is supposed to be a Resident Evil movie. The other significant endeavor into the world of film are the animated movies, which are directly handled by Capcom and are canon to the games. These are for the most part serviceable. The only one I actively dislike is Infinite Darkness, which is technically a mini-series, but let's be real, they just split up a movie into 4 20-ish minute parts. Regardless if you enjoy these or not, they take their cues from the latter-day action-focused games and not the series' horror roots. However, Resident Evil as a series has since embraced horror again, and given the fact that the RE2 remake was extremely popular, it really only made sense to go back to the drawing board and make an honest-to-goodness, faithful adaptation of the older games.
It just does those games over again, only worse.
And right when this movie started, and as it kept going, I was like, okay, I'm bored.
I think they'd be so goddamn boring, so goddamn forgettable, and then what they do to certain characters and how they just
In short, Welcome to Raccoon City was a fucking massive disappointment and a total waste of the Resident Evil name.
I really can't sit here and pretend like Welcome to Raccoon City wasn't a disappointment. Whether it be on a box office level, the critical level, or even on a personal level. Even though I probably should have known better, I was actually pretty excited for this movie. Probably didn't help that this was during COVID and prominent releases were few and far between. But whatever, all I know is that I entered the theater fairly excited and left disappointed. Not pissed off, shocked, or crushed, just disappointed. Still, upon revisit, I want to try and give it a fair shake. I know for a fact that there are some fundamental problems with the movie that no amount of lowered expectation or goodwill is gonna excuse. However, I think it might be possible that a silver lining could be uncovered. I guess we'll find out. Okay, this movie starts with a flashback of Claire and Chris in the Raccoon City orphanage, which I'm going to ignore for now because I think the actual start of the plot provides a great example of this movie's dichotomy. First of all, it looks excellent. If there's any positive takeaway from this movie, it's that the director knows how to shoot a horror picture. It's raining, it's dreary, it's dark, and it's awesome. These earlier scenes are especially great. The strategic use of old-fashioned yellow consumer lights contrasted with the darkness and the rain just creates an amazingly moody atmosphere. Honestly, this whole movie is lit extremely well. Every environment does a good job of conveying darkness without making it hard to see what's going on. You'd think allowing the audience to see your movie would be a prerequisite, but you'd be surprised. On the flip side of the excellent atmosphere is the clunky exposition-filled dialogue.
What are you doing out hitchhiking on a night like this anyway? Oh yeah, going to see your brother, you said. Right. Used to live here, you said.
I don't know if you caught that, but he asks why Claire is hitchhiking, and then immediately without pause says he knows where she is going and why she's going there. Then proceeds to harp on why Raccoon City sucks to really hammer home that it's impoverished.
Raccoon City. Better you than me. You know, one might have nightmares heading back into that shit old town. Nothing left except the raccoons since Umbrella started to leave.
I really don't understand why Claire doesn't chime in at all. Like when he's asking why she's hitchhiking, she could just answer, as opposed to having told him off screen. Having this conversation go back and forth would alleviate some of the bluntness. This guy going on and on without being prompted just makes him seem schizophrenic. Then the movie does the classic, whoops, I hit a zombie with my car and I thought it was a person.
You fell victim to one of the classic blunders.
It's boilerplate and it's fine. The whole point of this is that the trucker's dog gets infected and then bites him later. Enough about that though, we have to talk about the scope. You see, the whole point of that scene, besides getting Claire into the town, is to basically set up that Raccoon City is a shithole. Now on the surface, I don't really have a problem with that. I'm not gonna get on a high horse and pretend the sanctity of the games must be protected at all costs. We're talking about a series that killed off their most compelling adversary by having them go bankrupt. Anyway, back to what I was saying. Picking the first 3 games to adapt was certainly a smart move, as they're definitely the most down to earth. Still, they have their foibles. A great example of this is the size of Raccoon City. In the games, it's not really clear if Raccoon is supposed to be a small town or a large city. It's cramped and tiny, and the police department operates out of an old museum. Simultaneously, the most profitable pharmaceutical company operates out of it, and a lot of people live there. I chalk this up to a mix of the game being created by a Japanese studio and overall video game logic. So the movie putting its foot down on small dilapidated town on the surface makes sense. However, this has the knock-on effect of ruining the scope for most of the events of the movie. And this happens before the zombies even start showing up. Let's take the RPD for example. Now let me preface this with something. The movie states that Raccoon City is dilapidated and poor. However, we can visually see that it's a pretty big place. Now just because somewhere is shitty and sucks to live in doesn't necessarily mean there aren't a lot of people living there. 80,000 people live in Flint, Michigan, for example, which is a pretty apt comparison. So just as a guess for how many police there would be for Raccoon City in real life, maybe we'd expect like 50 to 100 cops, depending on the population. Now given this is a fiction, obviously we don't have to be entirely realistic. So I think a good scope would be 10 to 20 cops. Whatever you're thinking would be a good number, I bet it wouldn't be fucking 9. Now this isn't 9 regular cops, some dispatchers, the chief, and stars. That would honestly be perfectly fine. The total operating staff is 9 people. 3 regular cops, although as the movie shows us, Leon is little more than a glorified receptionist, the chief of police, and 5 stars members. That's it. This will be a significant issue later in the movie, however on the face of it, it's utterly bizarre and makes no sense. If the RPD is so pressed for personnel and funding, why in God's name are they so willing to outfit stars with custom uniforms, expensive custom weaponry, and a fucking helicopter? I'm gonna be real with you. I live in a city with a population of around 200,000, and I'm like 90% sure we don't have a police chopper. Even the movie knows this is a ridiculous concept, because they try to lampshade it with some casual conversation.
What's Vickers doing here? Thought we lost the chopper with the rest of the budget cuts. Maybe he just missed us. Oh, fuck.
Now I get that stars in and of itself is a very video gamey concept, but at the very least the ranks of the RPD are filled to the point that having an extraneous task force makes some sense. And don't try and outlore me and tell me that stars are privately funded in the games, mostly by Umbrella. That could be a good explanation as to why they exist at all, but the movie never brings it up, so I'm not really inclined to assume that's the case. Not only that, the whole point of Umbrella funding stars in the first place was so that Wesker could be in charge to keep it under their control. But Wesker doesn't work for Umbrella in this movie, so that doesn't work. Besides, if Umbrella was ceasing operation in Raccoon City, why would they continue to fund an expensive special forces group? It don't make no sense! Look, I understand it might sound like I'm being pedantic, but I wouldn't harp on this unless I thought it mattered. And it does matter. Now, I do want to give this movie credit, and I know I've already said this, but I want to hammer home the fact that it does a good job at creating an atmosphere. Before shit hits the fan and you're just able to bask in the dreary mood, it's honestly pretty good. Maybe less so when anyone opens their mouth, but you get my point. I need to make it clear though that the point of Raccoon being destitute and the puny police station is here to lessen the scope for budgetary reasons, and that alone. Which might be fine under some circumstances, but here it's assuredly not. Because when it's time for the movie to really hit the ground running and have the city descend into chaos, it really isn't felt. There aren't civilians running around in a panic, there's no police scrambling to contain the threat. All we get is the tanker explosion and a handful of zombies at the RPD gates. Just doesn't have the impact it needs to. This is also felt in the RE1 elements of the movie. If you haven't put it together by now with the inclusion of stars, this Spencer Mansion incident is now happening concurrently with the fall of Raccoon City. The complexity of the Spencer Mansion is now shaved down to a building with some zombies in it, and one secret passage that houses the entire extent of Umbrella's experiments. Yes, Kitty, I know, it's a bad movie. It's just all really lame. The dumbing down of everything more or less means we don't get much to sink our teeth into. This is where I become confused on the direction of this movie, because if you didn't have the time or money to flesh out both of these scenarios, my question is, why combine them? Why does this movie feel the need to mash together 1, 2, and elements of 3 if it can't do them justice? Why not just pick one and focus all of your efforts on that story? Because let's be real, when you fast track all these plots, you're leaving a lot of entertaining aspects on the table. Some concessions obviously need to be made. You're not going to include all the backtracking from place to place, and to that end, you're probably not going to include the more complex and silly puzzle scenarios. I don't think anyone was expecting to see the chess plugs in this movie. However, secret passageways, dangerous traps, double crosses, and just mysterious things that need to be figured out are not only extremely entertaining, but also staples of the horror genre. The thing is, the first couple Resident Evils can be almost contemplative at times. It's not just hardcore zombie action. There are lulls.
Carlton, honey, they're all lulls.
No, these kind of lulls. And I think those are an important aspect that even the later games in the series have trouble reproducing. We need to consider that Resident Evil isn't just a gonzo race to the finish. It's an adventure, and adventures need to be a more well-rounded experience. Entirely focusing on the plot of either RE1 or RE2 would help fix that, but it would also fix the Raccoon City scope issues. If the whole movie was centered around stars and the Spencer Mansion, the police force or lack thereof wouldn't be an issue. Likewise, if they followed RE2's example, they wouldn't need to bother with a lot of set pieces because they would have already happened off screen. What we get is a weird, streamlined amalgamation where everything that is included from the games feels like it's being checked off a list. William Birkin shows up for a handful of scenes and then turns into a monster. So, technically we did that plot. You do understand, though, that the Birkin stuff is the main plot of the A scenario. Not only that, it's extremely fucking creepy and scary. Some guy we barely know anything about villain monologuing before turning into a terrible looking CGI monster is not. You basically might as well skip it because it holds no emotional impact whatsoever. Or at the very least, remove his family from the equation. Sherry Burkham is a microcosm of this phenomenon, as she's more or less in the same position at the end of the movie as her video game counterpart was at the end of the game. But it's completely shallow. She doesn't know who Leon or Claire are. She didn't go on any kind of long, treacherous journey with them being directly responsible for her well-being. She gets taken to a location where her parents die, and that's it. It's not relevant for us, the audience, because we don't even know who this person is, so why bother? Why behold yourself to aspects of the game that are gonna lose all their impact anyway because the story has changed so much? The fact of the matter is, this movie suffers from this streamlining immensely, and the plot is not the only thing that's affected. A lot of the characters ended up having to be changed to facilitate the breakneck pace of the movie, and it's almost universally for the worse. Since the film has more or less no time to let the pieces of the world fall naturally in place, at least one character has to know what's going on, where to go, and what to do at any given time. Claire and Chris now grew up as orphans in Raccoon City, a new idea that isn't actually that bad in my opinion. However, all this is really used for is so Claire has a reason to know that Umbrella is doing experiments on people. Entirely superfluous characters are brought in and changed to the point that they practically have nothing to do with their video game counterpart. Ben Bertolucci is just a random conspiracy theorist whose only point is to do an exposition dump for the audience. Hey, but at least that's kind of similar to being an investigative reporter. Unlike Lisa Trevor, who quite literally shares no aspects between her original rendition, save for her appearance. Instead of being a mindless monster, she's completely in charge of her faculties, as well as being friendly to our heroes. This should have just been an original character. Don't get me wrong, it still would have been contrived. The only reason she's introduced is so she can save Claire and Leon from the liquor, and then show them where they need to go next. This is a running theme. Wesker's no longer a big bad, basically just as a convenient reason as to why Chris and Jill would know about the secret passage in the mansion. Chief Irons is no longer horribly evil, so he can lead Leon and Claire to the secret passage to the Spencer mansion. This one especially pisses me off, because clearly Chief Irons is in on the whole Umbrella thing, but he doesn't literally taxidermy people anymore, so I was kind of interested in his angle. Does he know what Umbrella was actually up to? Did they trick him, or was he just turning a blind eye in exchange for cash? We'll never know, because the movie doesn't even know. The writer/director knew they couldn't just hand-wave the Chief's knowledge, especially when the inquisitive Claire is a part of the group, so they do something I've literally never seen in a movie before. So naturally, Claire confronts Chief Irons about why he knows that there's a secret passage at the orphanage, then the movie cuts to Leon investigating a noise, while simultaneously making the Chief's and Claire's conversation barely audible.
Hey, why are we here?
This place has a secret passageway that leads to the Spencer mansion.
How'd you know about this place? Oh, I'm lost. The cage was behind the old ship we were doing.
Then when the movie thinks you're completely focused on what Leon is doing, they just stop talking altogether. They eventually bring in the audio again, seemingly to make you think that they were talking the entire time, but only here does Irons actually say something, and it's almost completely inaudible.
Guys! Guys!
Oh, and then they kill him in the very next scene, ensuring his whole deal never gets explained. This might be the farthest I've ever seen a movie go just to avoid having to explain itself. This is so damn frustrating. I want my main characters to have to figure out what's going on by themselves. That's the fun of it. Exponentially more contrived circumstances to get characters from A to B just pisses me off. And all the out-of-place references to the games isn't gonna fix that. I would be remiss in not mentioning the fact that some of the characters are not changed to facilitate the streamlined plot, but are just changed for no reason in particular. I do feel like a broken record here, but the early game's writing at their best is fairly boilerplate, so if you want to change a few things, that's fine. However, I can't really understand basically making the character the opposite of what they are in the games. I'd say Jill probably gets the shortest end of the stick in terms of personality, but I'd say she's generally the diligent soldier type, just more or less no nonsense. So naturally, she gets turned into a cringy wild card.
Say the line!
Jill!
Still sandwich now.
Richard doesn't get killed by a giant snake. Basically, this movie is a 0 out of 10. But the character that gets done dirty the most is definitely Leon. Again, in the game, he's fairly boilerplate. Naive rookie cop who's a go-getter. Now, though, he's a fuck-up idiot who's been transferred to Raccoon City more or less as a punishment. He also fucking sucks and is just generally annoying.
That's good, right? I think it's just, I think it's sort of jammed.
I really don't understand this at all. If you're trying to streamline the movie, why not retain the more boilerplate characterization? The Jill stuff more or less goes out the window when shit actually hits the fan, so that doesn't really matter. But with Leon, they now have to attempt to do an arc to actually make him likable. Keyword is attempt, because he basically doesn't do anything useful until the final moments of the film. However, this doesn't make me magically like him after an entire movie of him sucking.
A rocket launcher? Found it in first class.
Fuck you, Leon, suck my dick.
Hasta luego.
Ooh, need to calm down. So if you want the answer to the question, were people too harsh on this movie when it first came out? No. Unfortunately, it's just not very good. And aside from some nice visuals, there's not a lot of redeeming qualities. But apparently it didn't have to be this way. A running theme on this channel, well, I guess it's more of a running theme in Hollywood, is studio interference. But when it came up before in other movies I've reviewed, I've pushed back on the idea it was solely responsible for the film's negative reception. And honestly, a lot of times it's just a cope. People didn't like Blair Witch 2 because it was a radically different vision from the original. And people disliked Alien 3 because it killed off all the supporting characters from the previous movie, as well as sporting an extremely depressing tone. No amount of the director's original vision would have actually changed what people dislike about these films. However, in this case, it seems like the grass was actually greener and the director/writer just got fucked. The original script was apparently much more in line with the games. It sounds like the characters would have retained their original traits, and everything in general would have been a much bigger spectacle. More monsters, potentially including Mr. X, which I haven't mentioned his lack of inclusion, but he's sorely missed.
That's a Jack.
More quality time and locations, just more stuff to sink your teeth into. So, what happened? Well, excluding the usual foibles that more than likely plague most productions, a big issue for everyone at the time was COVID. And I mean, you know about the pandemic, I'm not gonna elaborate on that one. I think the biggest knife right in the fucking spleen by the studio, though, was nearly halving the budget. Just imagine turning in a script with a certain budget in mind, the studio okaying it, then only after you're in pre-production slashing it. I can only assume Johannes Roberts would have scaled the script down to focus entirely on RE1 or 2 if he had known what was available to him at the start. This isn't a case of someone biting off more than they could chew. He bit off an appropriate amount, but then Constantine Films just waltzed in and shoved an entire 3-course meal down his throat and left him to figure it out. This makes the whole streamlining of plot and characters make a lot more sense, and there are claims that he was rewriting the script smack dab in the middle of shooting the movie. I think we should take some of these claims with a grain of salt. The original script hasn't leaked, and what we're dealing with are bits and pieces we can pick up and rumors. It also must be acknowledged that Roberts' filmography previous to Welcome to Raccoon City was not very good. So potentially what was originally planned could also have been bad. Simultaneously, I still don't understand why changes to Jill and Leon's characters would have happened when they don't contribute to streamlining the plot at all. Although this could have easily been a studio note, because as we know, studios are fucking stupid as hell. We do know for sure that the budget got slashed, and through simple deduction you can assume this current incarnation of the movie is worse than the original idea. Genuinely, why would Roberts ask for $40 million if he could accomplish everything he set out to do with 25? It just doesn't make any sense. Furthermore, Constantine Films has a history of doing this with Resident Evil. The final chapter had its budget significantly slashed. And I know I said I kinda like the Paul W.S. Anderson movies, but the final chapter is a genuine piece of shit. Constantine is also the reason that the Romero Resident Evil movie never happened. Oh, and how about that terrible Resident Evil Netflix show? Who produced that? Yep, that's what I thought. So I'm beginning to sense a pattern here. The source material or even the filmmakers aren't necessarily the issue. It's this fucking company. And if they continue to lord over the rights, I guarantee we will never get an honest to goodness, true to form, live action Resident Evil movie or show ever. Wait a minute, this movie doesn't have Barry in it? Oh, you fucked up now. 0 out of 10, worst movie ever made. Get your head shot off with an RPG in a motherfucking lava pit, bitch.